Well, because it's a boundary change, it's literally Labour and Conservative in that it used to be with Lancashire, and so then it was Labour under Cat Smith, and now it's with Blackpool North, which was under Paul Maynard, who's a Tory. But in Blackpool and Fylde, this whole area has been 3 Tories. But Scott Benton, Blackpool South, lost his seat over a sting. Mark Menzies has just been finally had to quit. And Paul Maynard, although he's running in this seat, he's just been done for expenses scandal. So every one of the 3 Tories has been proved to be an absolute, horrible, basically a criminal. Certainly out of all the coastal towns, we're the poorest coastal town. We're also the worst place to grow up a girl. We have a high incidence of, youth crime. Everything here is poverty. You got the seafront, and that's it. And one street back, it's just degradation. And we have had a Labour council here for years, and they're not well loved. And of course, the Tory MPs who are not well loved. And yet still it sort of falls, it always falls to Tory. But this time I don't think it will. And we expect Labour will win this election, of course. But unless they've got people like me and others snapping at their heels, and a few other voices in Parliament that aren't from the Labour or the Tories, then how will they ever change anything? The lack of youth opportunity and engagement. It's sad. It's really sad. We've just come out of supply teaching for a while in our high schools, and it's just soul destroying. I got to the point where I couldn't have gone back to work. I was so upset by it. I'd not realized how horrible it was. They have so much to give. But I remember saying to a class one day last year, and I said, we're talking about careers and options and what we'll do in the future. And they just laughed. They're like, there's no careers for us. We'll get a job. It'll be minimum wage. It will be 0 hour. And we'll be lucky if we get that. There's no careers here in this area. And they just don't even believe it's possible. Whereas I've lived in countless, about 10 different countries. And once you've done that, I think there's this lifestyle, this lifestyle, this lifestyle. There's all these different ways of being. And what you're stuck with, it really is like a class war. They can never afford to get out of this place. I think instead of continuously looking for ways in which to punish them and restrict them from causing harm, we look at the reasons why they are playing up, why they are out on the streets, because there's nowhere to go. And, there's nothing that's free. Everything costs money, and everything involves either drinking or paying to be in an establishment. So where are the places that are theirs? And where is that mixing of generations as well? Again, that's something else I think we miss out on. I think there's a great deal to be learned in the world that I've just been in since 2011 of activism, where the generational mix was beautiful. We talk about diversity, but let's change what we think diversity is. Diversity of thought, diversity of generation, diversity of, class, etc. That diversity that you don't realize exists until, I remember one day there was a young chap at the site who needed to go to a meeting or a protest outside the gates of someone supplying the fracking industry. And one of our older residents, a woman who'd been in business for a long time and was now retired, was going that way and would drive him. And I wondered for the next 2 hours what they would talk about. And they became firm friends, and, we're all these crossovers, and there's so much you can gain from life if we stop pigeonholing people and having these expectations that our youth will amount for nothing because they come from a poor area. And so therefore that's what they'll be. And I just think it's so sad. So what would I do? I suppose I would probe because you don't know what tools are available to you. I'd want to know what tools I have and what businesses will engage with me and where I can get the funding to create more for them to do locally, to improve youth provision, youth services. And, we have the Sea Cadets in Fleetwood, which is great. But again, it costs you to get your kid there. It costs you. It may be free, but It costs you for the outfit, it costs you for the travel, and it costs you for the time that maybe a single mum working 2 jobs isn't able to do. So we have to do better. And I can't say I've got all the answers, but I know exactly where I would drive my attention. The same way with fracking, when we started fighting that, everyone said you'll never stop it. The government said they're going to do it. It's unsolvable, and how will you solve it? And at that point, you couldn't say how you would solve it, but you could say it was the red dot in the distance that you were aiming for, and you wouldn't leave until you got there. And so it would be the same with this. I mean, I'm as driven with politics as I am with, anything that I know is right and true and good and has to happen. And this does. So with youth, I think that's like one of the major things. But I have to say what probably attracted me most to Fleetwood's is I've been quite involved. I don't know, you probably know the campaign. It's called Truth About Zane, and it's now progressed to Zane's Law. It was a young man he was 8 years old and he died in his sleep during flooding in London. And it was as a result of the cyanide that came through from the landfill under their house. And his father's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, the mother got her treatment quick enough and was okay. But I've been quite involved in that for a number of years. And there's a landfill up at Fleetwood. And it's an old one, but it's full of bad things. It used to be a former ICI site. And they've just reopened it. And you can't really reopen it. It was supposed to be closed down and left. But they've reopened it, and now the smell is horrendous. People are starting to feel ill. And all the media keeps saying, oh, it's a stinky, smelly mess. It's more than that. It's may smell bad, but that's only the bits you can smell. The bits you can't smell are hurting you too. And no one's done a breakdown. The environmental agency's inadequately staffed. And, no one cares, and there's no accountability. There's little groups fighting it, and then that's on top of the stuff that's happening to our waterways with the sewage up here. And we're a coastal town that depends on tourism. On the anti-fracking, of course, up here in Preston New Road, Lancashire, was the site where it was finally stopped. It was also the site really where it was, the activism really started up here, even before they started developing the site in 2017. And then from 2017 to 2019, which was the finale of a fight that had started in 2011, we spent 1,000 days every day at that roadside, stopping trucks and raising awareness and saying, look, the company will tell you 1,000 times over there will be no seismic activity, and yet we're standing here and, oh, look, there's 56 seismic events, and no matter what they say, I don't believe them. Unfortunately, we were just proved right. It wasn't necessarily that we won through our activism, but we stalled them long enough for the public to become aware that they were liars and that they weren't safe, and for all the evidence to come out from across other places in the world. And so, touch wood, we're in a good place. We've got a moratorium. And it would be nicer if we had a ban, but up until, that it's called the Energy Charter Treaty. It was a treaty that allowed a company to sue a country for lack of profit, of opportunity to profit, purely because they said no to fracking. And you're like, right, okay. So if we'd have had a ban, then we could have seen our government sued for all the licenses they'd already done. So I think that the moratorium was okay, because the moratorium said, unless it is proved safe. Now, we know it's impossible to prove it safe, but it's a much better position because previously we had to prove it was harmful. Whereas now we're in a position where, go on, then you prove to me that breathing that methane is perfectly safe, that those early loss of pregnancies won't happen, that wildlife won't be impacted, that the aquifer, which in this area is the second most important aquifer in the country, it's the Sherwood aquifer, and they're going to drill right through it. That was the plan. So, but we won, and that also emboldened us. Because when do you ever bloody win? We never get to win as people. It's so hard. You only have to look back at everything, like everything from the miners' strikes to Hillsborough to Grenfell. We don't win. We get fobbed off with, just these incredible inquiries that go on for decades and result in nothing except lessons to be learned. And this was a case where we stopped it before it got started. The only lesson to learn is don't put that nonsense in our environment again. And and I think it made me feel, you can do this. You can. Firstly, we know that the only thing that really matters to companies is finance. So what really needs to happen is all the things are in place, all the tools are there. to investigate and fine and to stop the practice of illegally dumping toxins in our waters. But what the government succeeded in doing is cutting funding to environment agencies and other regulators that prevents them doing their jobs properly. I don't think they're at fault. They just are underfunded. But if they were given the equipment and the resources to be able to do their jobs properly, then this problem shouldn't exist. It didn't exist before, so why is it existing now? Because greedy, privately owned water companies are finding it more profitable just to dump and to pretend it was a rainy overflow when we know they've been doing it in dry weather. So it's lies, and it's lies for profit. So let's start bringing in the rules that already exist and the laws that would protect us and use those properly. You don't have to start everything from scratch. And here we have another problem as well, which is, so we have our sea, which is our lifeline for tourism. And last couple of years, it's been constant signs up going, don't go in. We've got a ghastly brown flag. We don't get a blue flag this time. We've got a brown flag. So you don't go swimming in there. And that's our tourism. And then down the road from that, at Files, slightly out of my area, but my next town, we were thrilled that there's this big array of wind farms coming. And we've got a lot of wind farms up here out at sea. And there was another one coming, and that was great. Except, again, they've now done it where they'll have to put the infrastructure through marshland and protected habitats. I mean, how ludicrous. Yes, renewables, but not at any cost. There's a lot of other choices they could make. So why make that one? So that environmentally, and as a Green Party person, as an environmental campaigner, of course, these are up there with my priorities, because it's all about the well-being of people and the lives they lead. And you cannot lead a good life if you are breathing air that's full of toxic waste and you're swimming in toxic waste. How do you the health impacts and the days of sickness and the prevention of doing better in life or enjoying it. So it's about the environment, but the environment as far as it goes to include, like, also you think about those young people and it's not going in any order, I hope you'll let it. Is that young people are then looking at these jobs, these 0-hour lousy jobs in a town where tourism is failing, and they probably won't even have those. And then I think, well, if we were insulating every home, if we were improving our public transport, those are all jobs for these people that would then last them a lifetime, because they would last as long as the resource, which is the sun and the wind, which aren't going anywhere, unlike oil and gas. And on top of that, the work they're doing would be saving them money. And, people say, oh, you can't say we're going to spend 90 billion as the Green Party. You'll never manage that. Well, why not? Why would we, like, if I was a businessman, I grew up in Hong Kong. So I was there for 10 years, and I know how serious business people work. And they will borrow everything and throw it at it because it's going to pay back 100-fold. You just keep drip feeding a little bit, or you restrict. How on earth do you ever get better? And also, we have the Treasury. We can do this at low interest and so on to ourselves, to lend ourselves the money. But we don't even need to do that, because we have these wonderful billionaires who don't care if they lose 2% off their tax, because it's not going to touch them at all. Then even if we just omit the Michelle Moans from our world, that improves our finances, improving our finances. And, I'm listening to them haggle all over the news about our budget this and our budget that, and I can't trust the figures. I can't trust what they're measuring or why they're measuring specifically that and not that. So I think it's very hard to have that political discussion on media when you can't trust most of the stuff we're basing it on. It's very difficult. We're the Green Party, and we just had our by-election here at Blackpool South 2 months ago. And so as a local Blackpool and Fleetwood Green Party, we spent every last penny on that. And that was it. So we have zero budget. But fortunately, I know a lot of people here. I've lived here for nearly 30 years. So on and off, I have moved out to other countries briefly. But so as far as I'm concerned, there's quite a good concerted social media campaign. I spent today up in Fleetwood, but that was mainly in a hotel having a nice cup of coffee with friends and seeing other people. But we've got 2 sets of hustings coming up, which is great. I love it when it's the college one. We inevitably win the high school or college ones. We come first or second. But yeah, the most of the work I'm going to end up buying Facebook ads because there's not much, and there's only really me to cover along with my friends who will walk the streets for me. But then, it's like 500 to get into this. So we spent as a party 1,500 getting our 3 candidates in. And there's a limit of 11,000 on each candidate to spend, which we would just be joyous if we could have spent that between us. But we don't have the money. But I also find it also anti-democratic in that, like, our local Labour and Conservatives are certainly spending far more than 11,000 each. But again, I don't see the regulators or the law kicking in. They find ways around it. So when we say there's a class war, it's at every level of society. It's down to your lack of, opportunity as youth. And it's in politics, there's the wealthy parties, and then there's all the rest of us. Yeah. The only people that can get past that is people like Reform, where they do it as a private company and a lot of private finance for a lot of favors later should they get into power. Yeah. So yeah, how is it out there? I think I'm really chuffed. Like the other day, Ian Hodson from the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union gave me an endorsement, and that meant so much to me because we did a lot of work with the unions. I remember the first meeting with the unions back in 2013. I went and kind of got myself invited onto a panel. I'd never even really dealt with unions, and I just spoke to them about the fracking, and it was amazing. We got their support all the way through. And some of the strongest days of action we took were when the unions joined us. And that understanding that unions are just like activists. They realize the power of unity and that together you can actually fight things. That's another thing that I fear with the new Labour is that they're going to completely new to the unions. They do not want to see that power in their hands. And that's terrifying, I think. We've got so little power as it is. We fight for our right to protest, fight for our right to fight for our right for our jobs and to fair pay and fair conditions. Crazy. Yeah. Oh, and I think I'm hoping for Merseyside pensioners to endorse me because I love them. And so I'm just going to do what I can do. I'm basically one person doing the job for me. We don't all have the same thing we could do, but I know that before I agreed to run, I checked the other candidates, and the Labour woman is quite well known, but I checked into her background. I checked the people who knew her, and she's party line. And if that's all you do is toe the party line, then who's towing Fleetwood and Blackpool North line, The Tory, absolutely awful man, Paul Maynard. He's been in this area for anyone who's allowed this town to come to the condition it's in. And to dare to even show his face at an election and ask to be re-elected is stunning. But when you add to that, he's just been done for an expenses scandal. Paul Maynard really shouldn't be in this race. He should be out of politics altogether. So I have no worries about. I would look forward and relish an opportunity to be on a hustings with him. The Labour woman, her name escapes me at the moment, is very much Labour through and through, and is very much the party line. And to me, I respect more, perhaps, a bit like in the Green Party, I can be Green Party, but I can disagree with a couple of things and I can stand up for the people I would represent with their voices. We have no whips, so I don't have to toe the party line. I can stand very strongly for the people in my area. So to me, that makes a huge difference. Liberal Democrat, I don't really know anything about them. They've not often done well in this area. At the last party conference, our leadership made a commitment to run a candidate in every seat in the country. It's almost impossible to do. That's 500 per candidate. We're not a wealthy party. With a strong focus on the 4 seats that we have a chance of absolutely winning outright, but with the rest of us just, going and getting on with our campaigns. Are some people who have taken up the nomination and stepped up to the mark to honour that promise that we would run in every seat? Are they as dedicated? Do they have the time? Do they have the money? Do they have the effort to put in? Maybe not. So we say paper candidate, but what that really means is we just don't have the resources of the funded parties. So some of our candidates will not look as active as they would perhaps like to be, but I don't doubt that every one of us would want to see our party win. So most of my upbringing wasn't in this country. So I didn't get to the UK. We left when I was 4 years old from London as £10 poms and went to Australia. And then when I was 12, we moved to Hong Kong. My mother became a leading female executive in the Jockey Club. And I went to school. That's where my high school was and where my first job in journalism was, for the Standard newspaper. I hadn't realized it was Hong Kong privilege that not having a degree didn't make an ounce of difference for me because, it was a colony. We were very spoilt there. Unlike being a £10 pom where you were 100% an immigrant and it was all very much different. But in Hong Kong, I grew up not really being aware of other people's politics. And then, although I came back to the UK in my 20s, I was in my 20s. I started working nightclubs and it was great fun. And I wasn't paying any attention to politics. Then I went to Europe for a few years, to Belgium, Luxembourg, and Spain. And then when I came back and I had my daughter and I started paying attention, because this is my country, I'm from here. I do feel like I should involve myself in my politics. In other countries, I was always a guest. But here, I'm not a guest. This is my home and this is where my family is. And I think once I started to establish roots, and now I'm a grandma and, I've got great nieces and great nephews. I've got my first great nephew now. And I felt like I needed to make a difference or pay attention. And when the Iraq War came and I could see what a lie that was, I think, again, in history, we can listen to history books tell us about war and who was right and who was wrong. But when you're actually watching it unfold before your eyes, watching them throw bombs and celebrate that, then that's an entirely different thing. And I knew it was a lie, that sexed up dossier. I just knew from the wording, the way they were saying it, everything about it was wrong. And that was not the right reason to go and kill people. No, we weren't a threat. So I became active at that point. I wrote angry poems. It really didn't change anything, of course. And I went on one march. But, I didn't really know what to do with that. And then just life happens. And then in 2011, my mother passed away in the May, but I'd been looking after her for a few years. And I often say to my sister, I think actually this is what I did with my grief, was become active and get engaged in doing something I could achieve rather than fighting the gloom and doom of not being able to bring someone back, So, so I went on I got involved with Occupy first. I'd seen it unraveling, with the Arab Spring. And when I saw that fruit vendor set fire to himself, I was devastated, but I couldn't understand. I knew things here were bad for people, but to have had to get to that level where you had to do something that horribly bad just to draw attention to it. And it upset me immensely, but I was also in awe of what the people were doing to stand up and not just sitting back and whinging about it, So I started watching that unfold, the Arab Spring, and then Occupy Wall Street happened. And then I heard that there was an Occupy happening in London in October 2011. And I thought, I'm going to go. I'm going to go see what it's all about. I didn't know anybody or anything and got involved in that. And I ended up spending my wages every week to go down and stay there 3 or 4 nights a week. And again, it's never really done that sort of campaigning. It was strange. But I met some of the most fascinating people. And where I thought I'd had a really broad upbringing because I'd been all over the world, all of a sudden I was sitting with people from different tiers of society with different experiences. And I learned more there than I'd ever learned in my lifetime, that you were hearing voices you would never have encountered before. And that changed everything. I really believed that there was this whole world that was possible. And it was only because the people who would make it were silenced. And I was bolshy enough to want to give them voice, Yeah, and then roughly during that time, I was coming back and forth every week to Blackpool. And there was a leaflet that came that said, fracking's coming to your town. It's, it's all natural gas, great for employment. It's going to be brilliant for the area. And this is a poor area. We thought that was great. So I thought, let's have a little look. Oh. And then once I started to look at it, I uncovered what it was really going to do to us. And it was terrifying. One of the first stories I encountered was the Utah midwives who were finding that the baby graves was becoming overpopulated and they needed more land. And they couldn't understand why was that. And that was because there was so much early term loss of pregnancy. And when they tried to raise the awareness, and they were all gagged, and the authorities would have nothing to do with investigating this. And then racehorses started to be born with birth abnormalities. And suddenly, because they were worth money, it kicked in. and they realized they needed setback zones from the crack sites. But it only mattered because baby racehorses were worth a lot of money and baby babies weren't. But it was that sickening facing reality, you know, and I just thought it was just vile, you know, and I've been wealthy and I've been poor, but when you're poor in Britain, it's so poor and so hard to stop being poor. You know, that's the hardest thing here. And the people who are in that situation are in no position to fight back because you're literally just trying to exist every day. And it's almost like if that's the plan, it works. You know, how can I put an awful industry into your town? We'll choose the poorest place. We'll choose this poor place and they won't fight back. They'll cry out for the jobs. They'll take the pollution. They'll just put up with it and they won't have the strength to fight back. Yeah, it's sad. I feel like people are really taken advantage of. And politics, well, that's kind of went alongside it. To me, I'm not really a political politician because I didn't pay that much attention to politics in my life, which is no bad thing because I see it from the outside. I wasn't raised Tory or Labour and I didn't even know what left or right wing was. And I still don't really relate to those labels in a way. I just really relate to injustice, you know, and lies. And that's what I relate to and that's what drives me. But I saw politics. Well, I saw Caroline Lucas at Barton Moss. We were down there camping and, you know, complaining about the frack site that was proposed there. And I watched her get arrested. And then somebody said she's a politician. I'm like, I'm with whatever party that is. Because if your politician is down there getting arrested with the rest of us and speaking such wisdom and sense, then that's the only politics I want. So, yeah. But I see it as just it's like with everything in changing the world, activism is that it's just another tool in your toolkit, isn't it? We have to be in every arena. You should be in the unions fighting. You should be in the workplace, in our schools, in education, and in the government more than anything. And you look at everybody racing to try and get the vote, get people to register to vote by midnight tonight. And there are so many who aren't or won't. And I used to have that attitude, which was, it's all a waste of time. They're corrupt. I don't even want to support that with my voting. But then you realize that who's steering your life? You know, it's politicians. So even if you don't want to have anything to do with it, you're stuck in it. They drive the car. You're just a passenger. So unless you can start wrestling with the driver and getting him out of the seat, then you're stuck on this shitty journey. I think the first image that came to my mind when you asked that question is being down a well and someone extending a hand, except it's not real. But you're going to keep reaching for it. They keep saying, look, you could be like us. It could all be better if you just trust us to get you out of this mess. And then they look at parties like ours and you're constantly told in the media, there's no point in voting for them. They'll never have power. But not realizing ultimate power isn't everything. You just need a bit of it. You know, it's not that we need to win the government. Yes, that would be great, but that isn't going to happen yet. But what you can do is have enough different types of representation within Parliament to make government more palatable. But how they keep winning is they have control of the media, they have control of the narrative, they can shut us down. And with the voices and the words they use, they make people feel like, well, I'm just too stupid to get it. Maybe it's just me. Maybe if I just try harder, maybe you have got the answers and you sound like you were educated to be able to get us out of this mess. It's just a myth, isn't it? It always reminds me of the Wizard of Oz, you know? You pull back the curtain, it's some short guy with a phony voice and, you know, it's just lies. And when you meet them, you know, I ran against George Osborne in 2015 in Tatton. I was offered the opportunity by the Cheshire Green Party. They said, will you come and run against him? There's no way you're ever going to win or anything, and no one knows you. So it's not like you're doing it for the votes. But we know that he is the chief cheerleader for fracking, and you are probably the chief opponent. So if you wanted the opportunity to be on a few hustings with him, do that. And I did. And I did it just for that reason. And it was exactly the Wizard of Oz. You know, he was an unimpressive human. Beyond unimpressive and not wise, not clever, not caring, not socially capable. In fact, probably one of the most inept people I've met. And I do this thing, and I do it deliberately, because as far as I'm concerned, you could have the completely opposite views to me on everything, but I could still find something in you I liked. Because you were born a baby, I was born a baby, I really love babies. At one point, before life wrote its story over you and gave you your different media and education and all of those things that led you to believe the things you believe and led me to believe the things I believe. Well, prior to that, we were just us, and whatever differences there are, that's okay. Let's have those differences. But, I'm still conceding human you are. And I tried that with George. And it was really difficult, because he was just, he was being guided by a young female who I think later turned out to be someone he was seeing at the time. He had no social skills, which surprised me. It was terrible. He couldn't interact with real humans, not at all. And if you can't do that, how the hell can you solve real human problems? Whereas I'm still down the back of the couch for 2p. It's like I'm not very employable, so I just get jobs now. I'm like everyone else here. Because, I'm just, they do 1-2 second social media search. I'm like, whoa, who wants that sort of trouble in here, So, yeah, so I kind of get it, really. But George Osborne and like the rest of them, it's all just a myth. It's like when someone puts a white coat on and all of a sudden you trust them with some medical advice, and it's just all myth. And I think we need to shatter that. I think there needs to be this revelation of what life really is, and that these people just got there by virtue of someone else putting them in their place because, they were connected. It's a class system. It's just, I've lived in places where there was, different levels of existence and poverty, but never seen a class system like it is here. Never, not like this. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I don't want to stop them. Because if who you are and the way you were brought up and the things you were led to believe make you believe that reform is right, then who am I to say that you're wrong when you look at me and say, how can you believe in this green thing? How can you believe that? I accept that level. We're still on the same page as this person who votes reform and this person who votes green. I do feel, though, that the myth and the magic that the Tories use to pretend to lean that hand down the well and get you out. And it was, as I said, I think before, was that, people like UKIP and Reform are very good at mimicking normality and attempting to say, hey, look, I'm not a regular political dude. I'm a guy who has a beer. You could see me down the pub and we'd be mates. But I can see that's a lie. I can see that's just not. That's faking authenticity, which is just insane. Whereas, thankfully, I think that I can't help but be authentic. And most of the people, anyone I would vote for, I would have to see them as a real human before I see them as a politician. It's not your political nous that's going to make me vote for you. It's who you are as a human. Why are you doing this? I mean, for me, I don't like politics. I don't like being. Can you imagine being voted in and having to sit in that place with those people? This is not a job opportunity anyone would reach for with glory. But you do it because you need to change the profile of the place. It's like when we did the 1,000 days at Preston New Road. Every day we walked up into ugly, angry. Police were brutal. We were all hurt. We were damaged. We were harmed, arrested countless times. And it just got uglier every day. And then we started bringing ribbons, and we tied ribbons on the fences, and we made art, and we bought food, and we danced, and we sang, and we had a playlist, because you had to remember what you were fighting for and not just be in the ugly. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but Parliament needs to be a lot more about what we're fighting for than the ugly that it is, And I think that's going to take people like Caroline Lucas, who lit the place up with honesty. And various politicians of all sorts in there are capable of that. Just unfortunately, they may be stuck with parties that don't give them the voice. And, you can see it every time a good voice gets in there, they're stuck on a back bench. And once you're on the back bench, it's going to dwindle. So what's the point? You finally get in there and then you're stuck on a back bench. So we have to change that. And I said from the moment I did Occupy, I said, what we need to do? We need to occupy politics. We need to occupy government, but not as in let's break the house down and go and sit there, because that's not going to change anything. We need to smuggle ourselves in as politicians in order to get what the real people want. Well, but again, that's wrong, isn't it, of me to say that? Like, how do I know what the real people are? And how do I know that I'm right? But that's why I would not object to reform being in the room, because I need to hear, because there's a chance that I didn't get your perspective on something. You know, you have to be open to that. And I think you're wrong if you close down to anyone. Well, I'm struggling with the whole Middle East situation. I'm finding it really difficult to imagine that anyone can see the slaughter of children. And I can't see that their perspective would ever be acceptable. You know, that stuns me. It just stuns me. Whatever heritage that child is, how anyone can look at that and say, but they had the right. It's just, you know, it's and I think, you know, and I know what it was with fracking as it is now. If I didn't do this, I'd be crazy with the not acting. You know, that you can see so much injustice and harm. How can you sit still, you know, and sit there and do nothing? You know, you've got to engage in whatever way you can. You can see the power, you know, of Israel. You know, we have friends of Israel in all our parties, don't we? And I don't think it's really the Israel that we think it is. You know, this is, I mean, I won't go into it because I'm not as informed on the ins and outs of the politics there, but you don't need to be to know that the slaughter of children is wrong. I think that the power that Israel has astounds me. I don't really understand the history of that and how they can have so much power over American and British politics. There's so much power. You know, it's like the whole like weaponry. You know, like we're supposed to say, oh, well, you can't have a nuclear weapon unless, you know, we've all agreed it's okay. And yet I think everyone accepts that Israel has a nuclear weapon and that's okay. So why is that okay? And I remember my daughter asked me the other day, she said, yeah, I can't believe we all put up with that. You know, like everyone says, like, it's part of a joke when you say the words, oh, yeah, trust the politician, ha ha, that's the punchline. How did that become the punchline to the critical system that controls how our children are educated, what dignity I get in old age, you know, how my healthcare is taken care of, who we go to war with and who we decide bombs to go and kill. But it's not a joke. It's real and it's true and it's necessary that we get involved. Choose me because I actually genuinely love this place. It's insane, but I've lived in all sorts of beautiful places in the world, some of the most beautiful places you could imagine. But every time I come back here, and there's a raw honesty to the people that I love, and I love Lancashire. It's the accent, the people, and it's just a reality here that no one pretends to be anything they're not. We all accept it's really bad here, but we get on with trying to make it better, and people try to make it better for each other. I love this place and I genuinely care about it. And I will genuinely fight for it like I would for anything I cared about like this. And I think that I can make you a million promises backed up by our manifesto. But really, like everyone else in this race, we can all say that. But what it really matters is why are they doing it? Why? And who will they represent when they get there? And I can 100% say, based on my record defending this town against threat, that I will 100% represent the people here.